I'm Yamina Lazic, the Associate Director of the Center for Russian, East European, and Eurasian Studies, and it's my great pleasure to present today Professor Lerna Ekmekoglu, who is the Macmillan Stewart Associate Professor of History at MIT. There, she's also the Director of Women's and Gender Studies program. Her first monograph, Recovering Armenia, The Limits of Belonging in Post-Genocide Turkey, came out in 2016 with Stanford University Press. And since she has published widely articles on various topics, including Armenian demands at the 1923 Lausanne Conference after the First World War, an Armenian woman's memoirs about her years at Constantinople's Central Prison during the First World War, and also about French Armenian communist women organizing in post-war Paris for repatriation to Soviet Armenia, which is the topic of today's talk. Currently, Professor Ekmekoglu is co-authoring a book and digital humanities project titled Feminism in Armenian, an interpretive anthology and documentary archive, which is slated to come out in 2025. And it is our great pleasure to have her here today as part of our Armenian Studies program and in co-sponsorship with the Embassy program in Islamic Studies. So welcome.
Thank you so much for the great introduction and for the invitation. I was here about 8 years ago, 2015. I did give a book talk on recovering Armenia. I think at the time it was the Abbasi program that invited me. I have very good memories of Stanford and the region in general, so it's great to be back and to have so many young, new generation of people in attendance in this beautiful, beautiful room. So what I'm going to present today is a part of my work, but it is a little bit outside of my expertise. Later on I can tell you as to how I landed on this topic as someone who is not a scholar of World War II and who is not a French or Soviet historian, really. I'm a historian of early Turkish Republic, interwar Turkey, Armenians in the late Ottoman Empire, as well as the gendered aspects of the Armenian genocide and its immediate aftermath. They all lend a legacy the way that I interpret this particular episode of history, but it's not like very directly related. It's indirectly related. Anyways, I did one article. I wrote a lengthy article on this topic, which really I didn't mean to write. It was just going to be a short, quick, in and out type of piece. But I got drawn into the source, the primary source, the one that I'll talk about right now, a lot, and it ended up being a lengthy article that I published in Etudes Armenian last year. So this talk is based on that. It's a little bit more on the descriptive side than the analytical side, which has its own pros and cons, really. But a big part of this project is just unearthing the fact that A, that these existed, B, that they were organized, and C, that their way of promoting a movement, an idea, had its own interesting and actually unique gendered aspects. So with that, let me start. Organized under the name Union of Armenian Women, in 1946, a contingent of Parisian Armenian women participated in the Bastille Day parade. You can hear me fine, right? How is mine? They marched while carrying an oversized French flag and their banner, which bore a portrait of their late leader, Louisa Aslanyan. The women must have made a point of wearing their traditional dress. They appear in what is considered to be Armenian folkloric dress, usually reserved for performing music and dances. They likely aim to signal their distinct ethnic identity to their non-Armenian comrades in the parade, fellow participants and supporters of the French resistance. In their group group photo, which is this one, the quality of pictures are not great for a specific historical reason, because they are coming from a source that was published in late immediate aftermath of World War II. The paper was very expensive. It's a cheap publication, and I never managed to get good quality photos from this publication. In the group photo, they pay tribute to two people. The one on top is Luisa Aslanyan, and the other one is Misak Manusyan. I'll talk about both of them. They are two fallen Armenian heroes of French resistance, the resistance during World War II of French against Nazi occupation. The banner behind them reads in French, which is in English, "The Armenian homeland, our enslaved land." It endorses repatriation to Soviet Armenia, which had commenced a year earlier under Stalin. Many Armenian groups, like the French Armenian Women's Union, considered the repatriation effort as restoring parts of the Armenian homeland occupied by Turkey to their rightful owners, Armenians. The Union of French Armenian Women stood by Comrade Stalin. In today's talk, I will talk about this association, about which no one wrote before, and their journal, Haygin, which means Armenian woman, about which no one has written anything. I will particularly focus on the ways in which this union supported migration to Soviet Armenia in the immediate aftermath of World War II. In the first part, I'll talk about this organization and its the organ Haygin, and as well as give you some demographic information about Armenians in France during the interwar years and aftermath of the war. And then in the second part, I'll be talking about what this repatriation effort was really and how they promoted it. First, some numbers. In the 1920s, the Armenians in France numbered between 40 to 70,000 people. So France is about 40 million, 40 to 70,000 of them are Armenians. And these Armenians are stateless. Officially they are stateless, that meaning they don't have citizenship status. Most of these stateless Armenians were only naturalized as French citizens in the aftermath of World War II, during the time period that I'll be speaking about. By 1951, there are about 85,000 Armenians in France. Half of them are now born in France, and the other half are naturalized. So, they are 80% of Armenians in France at this time period, before World War II, are workers. They are working class people. After the war, the number is 50 to 60%, but still the majority of them. More than half of the families living in Paris and its surrounding areas relied on textiles as their main source of income, like factory work in textiles. Men would also work at automobile factories, and women would work in both textile and sugar factories. So this group, which I can call French Armenian Women's Union, sometimes I'll just say union for the sake of ease, and their journal was Haygin. I'll tell you more about it, but I will use the journal and the union interchangeably because they are really the one group. Working class women composed women's union's main base and the target leadership of their journal. Like the broader Armenian community in France, they or their parents arrived in France as refugees from various parts of the Ottoman Empire after the Armenian genocide, or from Iran, as usually for education. Okay? And we also have during this period in France Armenians from Tiflis, who are in France. But the working class is overwhelming majority of the working class, which is 80% of the whole population, is genocide survivors or the new generation who was born in France, younger. Many members of this generation, born in France, participate, meaning after 1922. Participated in the resistance along an older generation born in the Ottoman Empire but left it as young children, such as Misak and Melina Manusyan. I'll talk about them. So, in 1942, Luisa Aslanyan initiated the establishment of the French Armenian Women's Union. She was already a prolific novelist, pianist, short story writer, who is originally from Tabriz, the Azerbaijani province of Iran. She first moved to Tbilisi to obtain a Russian gymnasium degree, from Iran going to Tiflis, and then after getting married in 1923, together with her husband, she moved to France. Her pen name is Las, and she also had a nom de guerre. She was active in the resistance, modeling. In the early 1930s, like many socialist and pro-Soviet intellectuals in France, Las joined a group called Committee for Aid to Armenia, which it was an organization established right after the Sovietization of Armenia in 1921 to raise funds and promote the Soviet fatherland in the diaspora communities, and in the 1930s, it became closely identified with Armenian communists. Like many Armenians who later joined the resistance, Las was also a member of the French Communist Party. During the early stages of the war, Armenian members of the French Communist Party founded a group called Front National Armenian, Armenian National Front, and Las and her husband, Arpiar Aslanyan, joined this group, which I'll call FNA. Okay, after joining FNA, which was closely tied to the resistance, Las mobilized other Armenian women and other immigrant women in the movement to form a clandestine unit that in time became the French Armenian Women's Union. But only 24 days before the liberation of Paris, Las was arrested together with her husband, and she was perished. She was killed in the Ravensbrück concentration camp by the Nazis. So she didn't live to see the V-Day, but her comrades really tried everything to keep her memory alive. Such as, this is the journal Haygin, meaning Armenian woman, and the very first issue pays tribute to her, to Las as their founder, and what says underneath is that who fell martyred. She's martyred for the fatherland, by which they both mean France and Soviet Armenia. After 1944, so until 1944, they are a secret organization led by Las. Las is killed, liberation happens, and then they come out of the underground and they become a legitimate group. And they open their doors to wider membership. And the executive board of the union promotes this new role, really, as the improvement of, and I quote, as the improvement of Armenian women's and mothers' intellectual level, as well as raising conscious Armenian women. In terms of numbers, so let me very quickly say something. So if you know some Armenian history, and if you have read my book, there's another Haygin journal, the same name, yes, the same name, but it was published in Istanbul from 1919 to 1933. My first book is partially about this journal, and that's how I actually landed on this topic, because there's connection, a little bit of connection between the two. And we don't have that many Armenian women's journals in our past, but for some reason we are duplicating the names here. The original cadre who published this journal, the Haygin of France, I don't think they knew about the previous one, because they are younger. Okay, so in terms of numbers, yes, by mid-1947, in addition to their central office in Paris, the union had 11 branches in Armenian populated working class neighborhoods and 637 registered members. This group of Armenian women likely followed the example of their French counterparts, Union of French Women, communist, anti-fascist, pro-Soviet organization that united women who had been involved in the armed resistance. And this is from their Congress, and you see that the two people behind the banners are fallen resistance heroes. And this happened, their Congress happened in October 1946, another one, and this is the first Congress of the French-Armenian Women's Union, which also happened during the same time, and in the background they have now their own martyred hero. And French-Armenian, Women's Union participated in the founding Congress of the Union of French Women. And then the previous picture that I showed you, the communist women, the big French Communist Women's Union, the founding Congress also included Soviet delegates, women from Soviet, actually from Moscow, came to France, and they included this 10-group delegation, included one Armenian person, Salome Alishan, who they were very happy about meeting her, the French Armenian women meeting Soviet Armenian delegates to this big conference. So that they were very proud and they wrote about her. So, it was this group, they were also integrated into the local Armenian community. Like the broader French politics in the immediate post-war years, it was dominated by communist anti-fascists. The most visible Armenian group was Front National Armenian, which also emerged from the underground after the war. And this women's union was considered itself to be the women's section of the general Front National Armenian, except that they consciously kept their autonomy in order to, quote, strengthen women's organizational spirit and initiative. And this was very much in line with the principles of the union's journal Hayke. This journal's overarching objective was to encourage women to take up public engagement and embolden them to form, express, and act upon their own opinions. At the same time, like all Armenian women's journals before or after them in the homeland or in the diaspora, this hygiene tool was not anti-tradition. It is categorically, as you can notice from their ethnic dress that you saw, like it's doing some work for them. And also there are these sections in the journal which is about food. There's like recipes for traditional dishes or non-traditional dishes really. And they have a section called Children's World where there's like maternal, the prioritization of the maternal role in raising the children is also covered there. And they also do promote some kind of French femininity, modern femininity. They even organized this communist journal a needlework and embroidery contest for their subscribers. So the point here was, and they talked about it like that, in addition to, the point was that ethnic tradition, customary notions of femininity and equality could coexist and should coexist. At the end, French-Armenian Women's Union was both an organization of international progressive feminists and a community of immigrant women bent on conserving and asserting their native identity in a post-genocide diaspora. Many of the branch's main activities were related to the conservation of Armenian identity. For example, they helped local Armenian schools, opened Armenian language night lessons for adults, organized summer camps for needy children, collected financial aid for the families of fallen resistance fighters and Soviet Armenian prisoners of war. So, second part, repatriation. What are we talking about when we say repatriation? Immediately after Nazi Germany's surrender in World War II, in May 1945, Soviet Armenian authorities appealed to Joseph Stalin and to the Central Committee of the Soviet Communist Party to allow diaspora Armenians resettlement in the Soviet Republic of Armenia. In six months, they received a positive answer. In December 1945, Stalin proclaimed that he allowed diaspora Armenians immigration to Soviet Armenia and that the party and the state would partially fund and facilitate this effort. This endorsement and invitation created a wave of excitement in Armenian communities all around the world. A wave of immigration started in 1946 and lasted until 1949, when the global political situation changed. Soviet Armenian doors closed, and I don't know, the solidification of Cold War basically happened. in France, all Armenian political parties, except for one, ARF, Tajnak Tutyun, all of them except for Tajnak Tutyun, plus Armenian General Benevolent Union, for those of you we know it. If you know, you know. I can also answer questions about this, but a big, big global benevolent union that functions to this day for Armenians, as well as the Soviet embassy in France. Together, they formed a committee called National Repatriation Committee. Even though many of these groups did not ideologically align with communism, they considered the ingathering of Armenians in the Armenian state, which happened to be under Soviet rule, to be part of the recovery of the post-genocide nation and the only guarantee of the survival of their Armenianness. This process was called Nerkaht in migration, Askahabak, ingathering of the nation, or Hayrimataktutyun, repatriation. National Repatriation Committee held its first convention also in October 1946, the same month that this group, Women's Union, had their own convention. And see, I think I have it, yes, in the background, on the here, it says Nerkaht in gathering. So they're already, migration, they're already supporting it from the day that they have their first big convention, during which they decided that they need to publish a journal. French Armenian Women Union helped the National Repatriation Committee in any way it could, especially by engaging the community's women. Like all diaspora organizations, Haygin, this journal, also pitched repatriation by emphasizing that to live in the homeland was the only solution to the dreaded sulum, which is the complete assimilation into the host country to the point of losing one's ethnic distinction. This was a particularly alarming existential danger for a group like the Armenians, who suffered a wholesale annihilation campaign only a generation earlier. According to Haygin, mothers had a particularly prominent role in preventing Armenian identity's disappearance. They believed that Armenian women's ultimate sacred duty was to preserve Armenians as Armenians, and this was a question of self-determination. They used the language of self-determination for this. In her farewell to those who were about to depart for Armenia, a member of the union, Shamlamyan, praised the repatriates for determining their own destiny. She emphasized that women's efforts in the diaspora added up to nothing, and that our children's, quote, physical, moral, and material salvation is in the fatherland. So on the one hand, they are doing, as you start hopefully to understand the paradox here, they're trying everything, summer camps, like other types of activities, language lessons in the diaspora in Armenian, while at the same time saying that whatever we are doing here is not going to work unless we really reconvene under the roof of one state that has Armenian as official language and operates in the, when they are majority. And this is happening. Don't get too distracted, but of course 1947, 1948, for instance, you can think about if other partitions are happening. India, Pakistan, there is this move towards India. But this is thus far, but however, Haygin, what I talked about is, or the group is promoting Soviet Armenian repatriation, is similar to other groups who are promoting. They are doing propaganda. Similarly. But there's this one dimension that's unusual and unique, which is the emphasis on how not only the communist but also the feminist nature of life in Armenia should be an incentive for Armenian families to pack up and move to Soviet Armenia. For instance, Haygin celebrated the 27th anniversary of the establishment of Soviet Armenia as they could have chosen anything, but they specifically chose that this is the country that, quote, liberated Armenian women's motherhood, emancipated Armenian women from their formerly subjugated position, and gave them economic independence, social equality, and freedom in every sphere. And actually they kind of, at least on some grounds they are right, because as you know, from 1917 on, Bolshevik Revolution on, women had suffrage in these countries, right? Soviet space, and Soviet Armenia too. From the very beginning, even in the previous independent Armenia, women had full political rights. while in France, women gained, where these women are writing, they gained the voting rights in 1944. They lived through it, right? So there's a big discrepancy here. There's one quote that's really long, but I like it because it summarizes everything so well. So as I speak, I'm debating if I should talk about, I'm gonna read the quote, okay? I cannot not do it, but you could follow me. It's so small, it doesn't make any sense, but I just added it regardless. So this is Mrs. Kirkoyan. She's young, she's an active member, she's a feminist. She keeps talking about how women should have a voice, really, and that, like, encouraging them for self-engagement in general. So the way that she frames what's happening with this repatriation and women is a good summary. She says, Armenian women, it's time that you become a citizen of your fatherland. Do your duty and enjoy the benefits of your country. You can reach political and cultural zenith only in communist countries. By returning to the fatherland, the Armenian mother saves her children from assimilation. In addition, by returning to the fatherland, the Armenian woman also saves herself. This is because absolute equality between women and men exists only in communist countries, thanks to which women are equal to men in every profession and cultural, political, and public realm. This is why, in a short span of a quarter of a century, women made headway in every field in that country. In capitalist countries like France, in order to reach any height, women need to knock on every door imaginable, and usually to no avail. Quite frequently, even talented French women are not able to weather the heavy conditions of workplace exploitation. Thousands of talented women thus vanish, with their wishes buried in their hearts. The conditions of Armenian women and men are even heavier because on top of all other difficulties that make the French women suffer, they are foreigners. How many capable women and talented Armenian women and young men have come to Europe, the city of lights, with big dreams and hopes, and struggled for a few years to realize their dreams, only to fail eventually. The solution to all of this, that is our salvation, is in repatriation. These types of messages were usually communicated by the testimonies of those who already repatriated. In 1948, for example, a certain Adrine Bujikanyan, who repatriated from Beirut to Soviet Armenia, wrote a letter to the journal in which she reported that there was equal pay for equal labor in Armenia, women were full citizens, and as repatriated women were immediately employed and able to raise in all professions. So this was a big emphasis that in France, they were exploited, not just because they were women, foreigner women, and many of them actually were undocumented for the longest time. Their most high profile repatriate was Melina Manusyan, who left Armenia immediately after the end of the war. So, Melina Manusyan is usually referred to as the wife of the famous resistance hero Misak Manusyan, which is both fair and unfair. And Misak Manusyan is a very well-known figure in Armenian history, Armenian popular memory. The couple were both orphaned during the Armenian genocide and spent their youth in France in the communist Armenian circles, close to the Hawk, They participated to the resistance, where Misak had a leadership position inside FDP-MOE, which was a subsection of the French communist resistance composed of foreigners. Nazis executed Misak in February 1944. Earlier in February 2024, in commemoration of his execution's 80th anniversary, the French government moved his and Melina's, the wife's, tombs to the Pantheon. They therefore became the first foreign resistance fighters and the first communists to enter the French Pantheon. So I'm just saying this to emphasize how important he was and also she was, the other Manusyan. After the war, Melina repatriated to Armenia by the special invitation of the Soviet government. And she was a member of the French Armenian Women's Union. In 1947, Melina participated in the March 8 Working Women's Day celebrations at Yerevan State University. She wrote about the day in the first issue of Hayli, the journal, thus setting the tone for the rest of the discourse on Soviet Armenia and women. Melina was captivated. So she's in the big hall, 8th of March is happening, Yerevan State University. She sees women professors, including Elif Petrosyan, who is a professor of philology and a survivor of the genocide, who went to the same school orphanage like Melina previously, Tibrotaser, about which I can talk later. She graduated in 1925, managed to move to Soviet Armenia, and became a professor. In her article, Melina underlined that in the diaspora, women could not even dream of such accomplishments, that they have never seen a woman Armenian professor, and that these things were already a reality in Soviet Armenia. So she's kind of appealing to the intellectual brand of the union. She wrote that her wishes had become reality. She was fully satisfied. And that soon, hundreds of thousands of women from abroad would enjoy the same opportunity. And indeed, many members of the French Armenian Women's Union repatriated. So in terms of of the 15 members of the board of the union, with the first group, 3 of them moved to Soviet Armenia. In the period from August 1947 to 49, 5,260 people repatriated to Soviet Armenia from France, which is 6% of the overall number, which is 90,000 people who, from the diaspora, repatriated, moved to Soviet Armenia. Majority of them coming from Middle East Arab countries. Lebanon being big, but also Iran. Iran is also big. In short, during this time period, about 1,500 families repatriated. So there are interesting things happening also that I might skip, but let me quickly summarize. Maybe it's better. So with the first group, for instance, when the 3 board members leave for Soviet Armenia, the group sends packages, gift packages basically, to the women's section of the party, Soviet Armenia's Communist Party. And they send clothing for 200 children to be distributed to the fallen soldiers of the war, to the families of the fallen soldiers. And in response, they are thankful, and they send 190 Armenian books back to France with some of the people that come back. So this is like one instance of how transnational Armenian communist solidarity among women would look like in 1947. Another interesting one happened in next summer, summer of 1948, when International Women's Democratic Federation, which is a big organization, the largest leftist international women's organization in the post-1945 period, which our union saw itself a part of, promoted it big time in the journal. The Federation had an exhibition in Paris, a big one, called Women's International Exhibition of Arts and Professions. And 48 countries were represented in this, but only women artists were allowed to participate in this exhibition. And with their paintings, crafts, photographs, documents, 43 different countries, and the topic was portraying the conditions of women's life in these countries. So the union organized a field trip to the exhibition, quite excited for them, went to the exhibition with the stated goal of seeing the Soviet women's pavilion, basically. And they were very happy and not surprised. I think they knew about it, I'm not sure, that there was a Soviet Armenian woman painter, artist over there, the one on the right, Mariam Aslamazyan, who, together with her sister, Yerevan Aslamazyan, and they are really good, famous Armenian painters. Now they have their house is a museum, nice, beautiful galleries in Gümrü, contemporary Armenia. So they met with her. The way that the journal talks about is that the moment they saw this sister from Soviet Armenia coming, they hugged, they kissed, they invited her to their office, which was called the LAS Club, after their founder, And then they came, they had a party, singing, dancing. And then when Aslamazyan went back to Soviet Armenia, she reported it in this women's section, and then they corresponded. So they wrote their stuff in their journal, Hayastani Aşağıda Oraya, the women, working women journal that Soviet Armenia women's section had, and Haydin also reported on how they were being written about in Soviet Armenia. The coverage of Aslamazyan's sisters aligned with the journal's overall message that in Soviet Armenia, talented women were able to realize their potential. Photographs of repatriated women singers who found a stage to perform this one. One of them is from Romania. Also, they are covering other places as well. Beirut, Romania, Bulgaria, or best teachers, best singing. Or in France, who are you going to find like a gig in an opera industry? Go to Soviet Armenia, you'll find it. And then, again, with this, they were appealing to a little bit, the more passionate amongst them. Okay, so I'm about to conclude mundane reality, the reality of what was happening in Soviet Armenia at the time versus this utopic picture is not my job here. I don't know as much, and it's not the point really. But also, I need to say a few things, right? Like, the literature on Soviet Armenian women is really very, very little. Very few works we know, secondary literature we have about this topic, but what I can say for sure is that they have struggled with similar issues that others, even in the Russian Communist Party, women were struggling, which is the double burden. So they were just basically both working at home and at work, right? And there was political repression, shortages of various kinds, housing difficulties, life was difficult, but it coexists with other factual information, and it is that Soviet women overall, in general, everywhere, had high literacy rates, universal education, free basic healthcare, and relative job security and benefits, especially in comparison to France at the time. But political repressions in the 1930s was significant. The omission of this brutality, so I'm just like adding one more dimension right now. The omission of Stalin's brutality in the organ of the journal is illustrative of how the Union unconditionally stood in the pro-Soviet and Stalinist attitude. Haydin remained conspicuously silent on the purges of Armenian intellectuals, politicians, and religious leaders in Soviet Armenia ordered by Stalin and carried out by the local Soviet government in Armenia. The deportation and liquidation of prominent figures, including women, started in 1936. Diaspora Armenians who moved to Soviet Armenia were not spared. So here it's important to understand that since its founding in 1921, Soviet Armenia received migration from the diaspora, but slower and not fully always like en masse or in great numbers, basically, right? But there's a wave happening after World War II, which is facilitated and paid for by other groups. This didn't happen before. So in the purges previously, in the 30s, late 30s, some of these diaspora Armenians who went to Soviet Armenia were also perished. And here, a big important example, some of you might know, Zaberi Yesayan. Important intellectual, which originally from Istanbul. She's from Istanbul, survived the genocide, settled in Paris. Already in Istanbul, she's the most well-known Armenian woman intellectual of the time, really. And she settles in Paris after the war and visits Soviet Armenia in 1927. From Paris, she goes in 1927. And upon her return, she becomes an active member of the whole Hayastani Oklotyan Committee, the Committee to Aid Armenia. In 1928, she publishes a book, Prometheus Unbound, which is written to promote Soviet Armenia as a communist feminist utopia. The book even includes sections on how March 8th was celebrated over there and how she met with the women's section of the party, and it presents a discourse that would be replicated 3 decades later by the French Armenian Women's Union organ in Haydin. And also, Another fact, she moves, after publishing the book in 1928, in 1933, she moves to Soviet Armenia and becomes a professor of literature at Yerevan State University. So all of this should make her a real role model for the French-Armenian Women's Union, yet there is not even a single mention of Zafer Yeseyan in the journal. This is because how her life ended. Accused of anti-Soviet activity, Yeseyan was arrested by the authorities in 1937, imprisoned and sent to Central Asia, where she died likely in 1943 under unknown conditions. Her fate, unfortunately, would be shared by many repatriates in the post-World War era. So just some more information about what happened to people who repatriated. So, repatriated Armenians were not spared in the political repression of Stalin's late years. In 1949, about 12,500 Armenians were expelled en masse to Siberia to live and work in special settlement gulags. These overnight deportations included about 1,500 repatriates who experienced additional difficulties because they didn't know Russian. Those who remained in Soviet Armenia faced poverty and shortages of all kinds, including gas, electricity, housing. These conditions led to an exodus of Armenian repatriates from Soviet Armenia after Stalin's death in 1953 and during the Khrushchev-Tito era, when some repressions and restrictions were relaxed in the mid-50s and 60s. Many repatriates from the Middle East and Greece left for North America. Some of them came to California actually at that time, in the 1970s and 80s. All of the refugees, almost all of them, who had emigrated from France, returned to France. And Melina Manusyan was one of them. But the story is a bit more complicated. Life was not totally bad for all repatriates. Some of them chose to stay there. And the ones who chose to stay, it looks like they were already from very, very low, very poor backgrounds. So they didn't have much to return to, basically. As for Melina, she studied philosophy and journalism. So in France, she was just either a working class person, very low paying secretarial jobs. In Armenia, she studied philosophy and journalism and then taught French and journalism in different schools before returning to France. This picture is from Astrid Atamyan's AGBU laptop. You can just search it, find it. There is a new, finally great book about Melina Manusyan and the Manusyan couple. That's in French, that she co-wrote. I highly recommend if you're interested. About the conditions back in France, things changed in late 47 with France's shifting alliance towards the United States as a result of the Marshall Plan. The anti-communist turn in French politics manifested itself in multiple forms, most forcefully in 1947 when the French Communist Party was forced out of the government. All foreign organizations affiliated with the resistance and the Communist Party were ordered to dissolve. Consequently, the Front National Armenian closed in 1948. The solidification of the Iron Wall also led in September 1948 to Soviet Armenian government ending the repatriation campaign. The doors were closed. The last issue of Hiding that I could find is from February 1949, so in total the journal published 19 issues. The end of the repatriation campaign, along with the French crackdown on communist organizations, spelled the end of Hiding. We do not know if and when, in what capacity, the French-Armenian Women's Union continued its activities, and as many parts of my talk today, more research is needed. Thank you for your attention.